Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. I am beginning a series of lectures, presentations, brief ones of around 20 minutes each, regarding the important question, what is Islam? It promises to be a long series of lectures which I have designed to be divided into 4 modules. In the first module, I will discuss what is Deen, where do we get it from, what are its sources, what are its constituents, what does it comprise of, what is its objective, why are there differences, and what is the solution to these differences. The second module is going to talk about beliefs. What are the beliefs? Why do we have to believe in these elements of faith? Why is it that there is misunderstanding about them? And so on. In the third module, I will talk about acts of worship, ibadat. Again, what are they? What is salat, formal prayer? What is zakat, alms giving? What is fasting? What is hajj, umrah? And why? And what exactly is the right spirit? And last but not the least, I will talk about some other important issues also that people want to know about regarding teachings of Islam, like what is jihad, what are the etiquette of gender interaction, punishments, why those punishments, how can people be living in peace together, the economic law, prohibition of riba, prohibition of gambling, political law of Islam, and why are there some edibles that we cannot consume, why not eat the flesh of pig, for example, etc. So, all in all, hopefully, it's going to be a promising series. I would want your feedback in the form of questions. So, after I've delivered a few lectures, if I receive an adequate number of questions that deserve to be answered, I'll have then 1 or 2 sessions of question answers as well. So let's make a beginning. The first presentation is on the question, what is Deen? Where do we get it from? What does it comprise of? And what is its ultimate goal? Deen is the message that the Almighty sent to humans to guide them in this worldly life through His prophets. Now, when I say prophet, I'm actually translating the Quranic expression Nabi. But there were some prophets who were Rasul as well. I call them messengers. What is the difference between the two? We shall talk about it later, hopefully in detail. But one thing is clear, that Rasul is a subset of Nabi. So God chose Anbiya, the plural of Nabi, the prophets, and He delivered His message to the mankind through them. Angels brought the message to the prophets, and prophets delivered it to mankind. This message is called Deen. Now, where do we people get this deen from? Where should we learn it from? What is its original, genuine, proper source? What are its important ingredients? What does it comprise of, in other words? And what does it seek to achieve? What is the target? All these three questions: where do we get it from? What does it comprise of? And what is the ultimate goal? All these three questions have been answered in one Quranic verse. So imagine how important that verse is. And not surprisingly, therefore, we find that this verse has been repeated in the Quran 4 times. Not in the very same words, somewhat worded differently, but it is exactly the same message in different parts of the Quran. The first time it's mentioned is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is the second chapter, by far the longest chapter of the Quran, in verse 129, where the Almighty is mentioning the fact that Abraham, and Ishmael alayhimus salam were constructing the house of God, the Kaaba, and while doing so, they were praying to God. They prayed to the Almighty for a number of things, one of which was that they asked God to select a person from within this city, the city that this house is going to ultimately make. They're going to be people who will reside around it, and it's going to be a community, a place where a good number of people are going to live. So they prayed to the Almighty to bring a prophet who yatlu alayhim ayatihi, would recite before them ayatika, your verses, and he is going to teach them al-Kitab and al-Hikmah, and will do their tazkiyah. This is mentioned here. In the same Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 151, the Almighty then goes on to mention that the way it was prayed for, the Almighty has sent now amongst these people a messenger from within them. And what does he do? He recites before them his verses, he teaches them al-Kitab and al-Hikmah, and he does their tazkiyah. Next surah, Surah Al-Imran, surah number 3, verse 164, the Almighty mentions again the fact that لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, God has been very kind to the believers. It has been a favor that the Almighty has conferred upon believers, that He sent a messenger from within them who recites His verses before them and does their tazkiyah and teaches them al-Kitab, al-Hikmah. And the fourth time it's mentioned in Surah 62, Al-Jumu'ah, verse number 2. Now, as I said, these verses are answering 3 extremely important questions regarding God's deen, His religion. Number 1, where does it come from? Well, the verses say that God chose His messenger, Rasulam minhum, a messenger from within them. So, when it comes to the question of deen, it has always got to emerge from the Prophet of God, may God's mercy be on him. He is the only source of God's religion. That has been the case all throughout human history, ever since we had God's prophets coming to mankind. If one wants to learn about God's will, His message, His expectations, then there is only one source. which is God's prophets, his messengers. All other people are the servants of this message. They help others to know what the prophet of God, the messenger of God, has given them as God's religion. So that's one point absolutely clear. The second one is, what does it comprise of? This verse or these verses clarify that God's religion comprises of primarily two constituents. It has two things put together which form Deen. Number one, al-Kitab, and number two, al-Hikmah. What are they? Well, I have to talk about them, and I'll talk about them shortly. And the third question that this verse or these verses answer is, what is the goal? What is the purpose? And the answer is tazkiyah. What is tazkiyah? Purification and growth, progress. What does that mean? Well, again, I'll explain it. So let me first pick the clarification about what al-Hikmah is. We get God's message from God's prophets, his messengers. The message is comprised of two components, al-Kitab and al-Hikmah. What is al-Hikmah? When you read the Quran carefully, you come to learn about the fact that al-Hikmah is basically morality, moral principles, moral values, A, and beliefs, B. First, let's take moral principles. We know, and it's confirmed by the Quran, that the Almighty gave humans an understanding, an appreciation of what is right from what is wrong. All humans, no matter which part of the world they live in, no matter which part of the history they belong to, all humans, when they come to this world, they come with an inborn understanding, appreciation of what is correct, morally acceptable, what is incorrect, morally unacceptable. Now, you might ask, how are you describing it as al-Hikmah? Well, the answer is that there is a mention in the Quran in chapter 17, Surah Bani Israel. It is also called Isra, al-Isra. From verses 22 to 39, this passage of the Quran is talking about a number of universally acknowledged moral principles. In fact, there are 10 in all, and there are quite a few exegetes and scholars of the Quran who believe that this mention is the Quranic version of the 10 commandments of the Bible. So, it talks about the fact that we shall not worship anyone except God, that we shall be good to our parents, parents shall be taken care of, that we shall not kill an individual, we shall not come close to fornication, adultery, we shall not exploit the vulnerable, the weak, like orphans. Their wealth is to be taken care of. That when a trader is going to trade and is going to weigh, his scale has to be balanced. He's not going to commit frauds. That when we make commitments, we are going to be firm in our commitments. That we're not going to poke our noses in the private affairs of others and thus cause harm to others. That the poor people have to be taken care of when they are in need by the rich, and that we as humans shall never be arrogant. So all this has been described But towards the very end, the Almighty says, Zalika mimma awha ilayka rabbuka min al-Hikmah. These are the teachings that we have given you in the category of al-Hikmah. So in other words, the Quran itself is clarifying that al-Hikmah is actually moral principles. They're so universal in nature that I got an opportunity once to deliver a lecture to a group of some 400 senior employees, executives of a group of companies in India, and most of them were Hindus. And I was asked to deliver a lecture on morality. And I mentioned these 10 principles without mentioning that I'm talking from the Quran. And I remember that an elderly participant from amongst them stood up and he said that we've got no difference of opinion. We've got no dispute regarding what you've said. In other words, all humans share these principles as their very own. You might ask, why then did the Almighty had to describe them? I mean, God's message, ordinarily, we expect it to add value to what we already know. After all, if I am delivering lectures on Islam to you, I'll not start from the alphabets of English. That you already know. Well, the answer to this question is that even though we know what moral principles are, we tend to forget them. We tend to ignore them. So the Almighty has reminded us through His message. Why do we ignore them? Well, because even though moral principles are clear that they need to be followed, they are at times, probably on many occasions, difficult to follow. Why did we need to be reminded? Because we know that there are many things which are evil, bad, morally despicable, but they are tempting. They give us some immediate relief, excitement, and we give in to it, to the temptations. So the Almighty reminded us through His message, through His book, that these moral principles need to be taken care of. They are from me, and be sure that you are taking them seriously. That is why God's message is described as, apart from other expressions, described as az-zikr. So the Quran calls itself az-zikr. There is a famous verse of the Quran wherein the Almighty has promised that the Quran is going to be fully preserved. Verse 9 of Surah 15, Surah Al-Hijr, verse 9. The Almighty says, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra. Indeed, it is we who have revealed this reminder, Al-Quran, in other words. Wa inna lahu lahafizun. And we are going to ensure that it remains fully preserved. So, the Quran is a reminder of the realities that we already know, but we tend to ignore and forget them. So, that's one part of al-Hikmah. The other part of al-Hikmah is beliefs. So, we know from the Quran that there are a number of beliefs that we are expected to believe in. The Almighty mentions in the 42nd chapter of the Quran, Ash-Shura, verse 52, addressing the Prophet, Ma kunta tadri mal kitab wal iman. O Prophet, you didn't know what was al-kitab and what was al-iman. Now in this passage, instead of using the expression al-Hikmah, the Almighty is using the expression al-Iman. So along with al-Kitab, now we have al-Iman, which really means that the Almighty is clarifying that al-Iman is also a part of al-Hikmah. Now, what brings morality and al-Iman together? The answer is that al-Iman, faith, beliefs, they answer the questions that arise out of the appreciation of morality. Beliefs, by the way, are acknowledging those realities that we cannot see, but they are there. How do we know that they are there? Because of the strong, overwhelming arguments supporting them. And we shall see that in our discussion in the module of beliefs, that there are strong arguments supporting the reality that these beliefs are indeed real. So these beliefs, they answer the questions arising out of the understanding of universal morality. The first question: why is this morality, these principles, universal? How is it that everybody has them? The answer is one God. Because there is one creator, one designer. Therefore, don't be surprised that what he has designed is just the same. The second question: why did he do it? I mean, it's problematic. It's being a morally upright person is not an easy thing to do. The answer is the life hereafter, the other belief. That is, this life is a test, and there's going to come another life when the way we perform in our moral domain is going to be ultimately made, the reason for people being accountable, and it's going to be decided as to who is going to succeed and who is going to fail. So, this life is only a test, and it's the next life where the result of this test is going to manifest itself. Third question: how do we know about all these facts? Well, through belief in prophets, belief in divine revelation, wahi, belief in books, belief in angels. So all these beliefs are therefore a part of al-Hikmah. So what I've said in this presentation is that Deen is God's message, which He sends to mankind through His prophets, messengers. It comes only from prophets. It is comprised of al-Kitab and al-Hikmah, and the ultimate purpose of it is tazkiyah. What is al-Kitab? What is tazkiyah? And some other questions is what I'm going to address in the next session. I hope you join me in the next session as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.